6 games in a row winning streak, Miami Dolphins coming in to take on the first-place Baltimore Ravens this week. Relatively large football game, but some things have been a little overshadowed down in South Florida. This guy's been covering football for as long as I can remember. Our paths came so close to overlapping back in the late 1980s when the Miami Herald flew me down to fill in for his job when he left covering high school sports and moved on to the Dolphins. Armando Salguero comes on for the Miami Herald. I don't have him on often enough. I don't remember if I've ever had Armando on, but it is a pleasure that you would take some time and come on. What's going on down in Florida besides 82 and sunny, Armando?
Wow, now that I think of it, why is it that you've never had me on before?
Well, don't start this trend because I will call you. I will stalk you, Salguero.
All right, so
what year did you go on the Dolphins beat? Was that 89?
1990.
90,
was
okay.
my first year on the Dolphins, and it's been a love fest for 26 years ever since.
Well, it's interesting because when you left to take the Dolphins beat, your job opened, and the Pontiff, Mr. Pope down in Miami, had me down, interviewed me. Paul Anger was the sports editor, and I came close to taking the job, except it was like a half pay cut from taking a union job at the Baltimore Sun, which is a whole other story about sports writers and life in the 1980s. But I didn't want to come down and cover high school sports. Is it Liberty City and Overtown, correct?
Yes, it is.
This is right after the riots during the Super Bowl, right? I mean,
yes,
literally.
It is.
And, what a place you have down there in South Florida. I come down all the time. My wife and I almost came down this weekend, quite frankly. Sunshine and all that. But beyond all of that are these incredible, incredible human stories that you shared with your readers last week on the backside of the Colin Kaepernick thing. I want you to tell the story because I didn't know this story about you. I talked to Adam Beasley earlier this week, who was one of my cohorts up here when he worked for the Ravens, and he said he knew the story about you. But, boy, the Kaepernick thing and you and Kaepernick going back and forth, just start from the beginning, and the fact that you are a Cuban-American and the death of Castro really meant something to you and everyone around you.
Sure, and before I tell you, Nestor, understand, my story is not a heroic story. My story is like a million and hundreds of million, really, other immigrants that came to this country because they wanted a better life and a better way of living. And this is the best country on the planet. There is no doubt about that.
My pal Dennis Kolatzis from Coons Ford here, he does radio on Thursday, he said, when people start swimming away from America to get somewhere else, then we'll know we have problems because
Absolutely.
People swim across oceans to get here. Right.
Yeah, Colin Kaepernick talked about how great Fidel Castro was. I've never heard of anyone wanting to leave here to go there. So there's
Except
that.
for maybe a weekend, my wife and I, for just for a couple of days.
Well, we should talk about that one off the air.
Okay,
But anyway,
well, you can talk about it on the air, but that's okay. Go ahead.
Well, so do you want that or do you want
No, I want your story. We can do this all in order, and you've already offered to come back a second time.
That's right, and many other times as you deem it. So I was born in Cuba, and my parents didn't want me to live, under a communist rule. They didn't want me indoctrinated. They didn't want me cutting sugarcane. They certainly didn't want me fighting wars in Angola. So they applied for a visa. They got the visa 5 years later. Understand that
5 years later. So it was 5 years of... Now, what year were you born?
1962.
62. So all hell broke loose literally when your parents were in love, late 50s, early 60s. It was all kind of fresh, right? I mean, what they endured from before Castro and Che came out of the hills to after. They saw it all.
Yeah, they saw it all. I was born right into the suck. And what happens in Cuba when you apply for a visa to leave, you are immediately unemployed. You are immediately, a persona non grata. You are immediately visited by the state police multiple times a month. And so for 5 years that went on. Anyway, so come that day in 1967 when my family, my mom, my dad, and myself are supposed to leave, what happens is we go to the airport. There was a thing called the Freedom Flights program. And that's what we were on to come to the United States.
This is 67, 68, right?
67.
Okay.
And we are on We're on, the foot of the stairs. There is a government soldier dressed in green. He was carrying an AK-47. I remember it like it was yesterday. He asked my dad to see his documentation and the family's documentation. And he told him, well, your family documents are in order, so you're all free to leave, but I've decided that only 2 of you are going. So make a decision right now which 2 are going, if any of you are going. And do it quick, otherwise none of you might be going. So, after a lot of drama and tears and stuff like that.
And one of them has a machine gun, by the way. We should point that out.
Yeah. It was an AK-47. I remember it. I didn't know at the time it was an AK-47, but now I recognize it.
You knew it wasn't a water pistol.
Yeah. And so my mom and I got on the plane. My dad stayed behind. My dad stayed behind not knowing if he'd ever see us again. 3 years later, he
not
was
knowing
fine.
that if the plane hit the tarmac, he'd get shot in the head and dumped out into the ocean, right? I mean,
you never know. Obviously that guy was having a bad day that day.
That happened. Plenty of times that happened in Cuba.
So 3 years later, 1970, is the next time that I see my dad. He's walking through the concourse at JFK coming to, meet with us. And I didn't recognize the man. I mean, I hadn't seen him for 3 years. He was rail thin. What happened was basically I had to reintroduce myself to my dad and vice versa. From my end, I had to learn to re-love my father because he was a stranger to me. And that separation, those 3 years, that affected our relationship for a long time. And, obviously that wasn't a big deal at the end of the day, but Fidel Castro did that. That's the thing. And he did that hundreds of thousands of times and worse, because at least I got to reunite with my dad. You have no idea how many stories of families where the dad went to the firing squad or the mom was dumped in prison and never came out. You have no clue about that, and I have no clue because they don't keep stats about that.
Yeah, and there were no storytellers there to tell the stories, right? I mean, there were no journalists there to document this. CBS News wasn't there when this was going on because they weren't allowed to be there. And, it's a frightening situation for the world and for what we've done to our own country here over the last month because, and I can get on the political rail, but the Colin Kaepernick side of this, and look, you've been in sports forever. I've been in sports forever. Our paths have crossed now over 30 years. You've been at this and I've been at this. I'm celebrating 25 years on radio this week. I went to Cuba in 99 for the 4 days that Major League Baseball played their game down there. I woke up Saturday, and when Castro was dead, my wife woke me up 7 in the morning. She says, Castro's dead. I shared the picture of Peter Angelos and Buddy Selig sitting with Fidel down there and yucking it up and having a good time. I went down as a journalist. I had a few drinks. I was there as someone who wanted to see what Cuba looked like. And from the first day I got there, I realized a lot of the preconceived notions I had in many, many ways were off. It's been 18 years, almost 18 years since I went, and I spent 4 days there as a journalist tourist. But I kind of got the vibe when no one was allowed in the stadium other than the people Castro wanted in the stadium. There were no tickets. You understand when you talk to people away from the scene. But I did feel safe there. I felt like the people there weren't as greatly abused. The people that were walking the earth there that had sort of given into it. But then there's Colin Kaepernick, who, when you and I knew each other, wasn't even born, right? I mean, he's about 30 years old at this point, and he's running around with the shirt on without understanding what the shirt means, right? So I guess this is all part of pop culture now, that emojis and cartoon figures and Che Guevara on a shirt and all that good stuff, it doesn't have the translation. And Kaepernick starts taking the knee. Then he pops off about not voting. And I was in the Bay Area the day of the election, so I got to hear a lot of that and the fallout of all that. But then give me me the story about the conference call, because I'm familiar with this every week. I was on the conference call last week with Marvin Lewis. This week, obviously, the Dolphins had some conference calls for the media, but you engaged Kaepernick about Fidel Castro, and this Castro was still alive at this point, right, earlier in the week.
That is correct. And understand, Colin Kaepernick does his protests, and I have no qualms with him doing his protests. That's his deal. That's one of the reasons I came to America, because you have the freedom to dissent. You have the freedom to express yourself. You have that freedom here. And so that is a subject totally different and apart from what we're talking about here. My question to him was, so you're protesting what he says is mass incarceration and systematic oppression of minorities. Well, after he did a couple of these protests, he went back, took a shower, and put on a shirt with Fidel Castro on it. So I asked him, Colin, how is it that you can protest, systematic oppression, as you call it, and then proudly put on your chest the picture of a systematic oppressor?
And perhaps the most famous one of our lifetime, right? I mean, there's Hitler, there's a handful of others. We could throw some others in, but if he's in the top 10, of of the last couple of centuries anyway. I mean, it's all you need to do is kind of Google it, right? I mean, and I thought, by the way, your newspaper did an incredible job of being fair to history, much more so than our current president did, quite frankly, last weekend on the Castro situation. Because someone did ask me who just didn't know. They said, one of my younger coworkers said, so tell me about Castro. I said, just go read the Miami Herald story from last Saturday. It'll kind of set you straight on it. I mean, certainly more so than the news media coverage last week, which was kind of amazing, quite frankly. When people die here, we have to glorify them, don't we? Even if they're Fidel Castro.
No, we don't. Because we should be true to the facts and true to history. I don't know of any other generation other than this generation that would go ahead and turn a blind eye to murder, turn a blind eye to oppression, turn a blind eye to all those things, and applaud a guy for good health care. It's like, well, let's see. The Nazis, they built the Autobahn in Germany. We didn't applaud that when we defeated them because we understood that the Nazis were bad. Mussolini made the trains run on time in Italy. We did not stand up and hail Mussolini because he was a bad man, a bad dude, a dictator, a tyrant, a murderer, and we didn't applaud that. But this generation, for some reason, decides the guy did health care and it was free and he murdered a few people. Let's applaud the health care. It's beyond the pale. It's offensive. It's insulting and it's ignorant.
Well, and part of the ignorance is for those who want to remain ignorant, they shall remain ignorant, right? But for people that want the truth, it's all sitting there. And in the case of Kaepernick, this is where sports and politics collide. And by the way, I'm about to get into the football side of this. Armando Salguero joining us here from the Miami Herald. You can follow his journey, and tens of thousands do, at Armando Salguero. And you can also find him at miamiherald.com as well. And then Colin Kaepernick has to come and play football. And you wrote an unbelievable column. I would tell anybody, go read it. That's the beauty of modern, your mobile device. It's a click away. Go read Armando's piece from last week. But then Kaepernick has to show up and play a football game. And between the time you chat with him, take him to task in the Miami Herald, 24 hours later, Castro drops dead. Kaepernick lands on a plane and then has to go out in front of Miami. And I found it interesting that the reception that he received there was not from a bunch of Cuban folk like yourself who had a dog in the hunt, but 60,000 other Miami Dolphins who are your friends, who are your neighbors, who know you or people like you, and who understand that Colin Kaepernick did a really stupid thing and said some stupid things. And then on the backside, once again, what we see from the next generation is he doubled down on stupid.
Yeah, well, actually, Nestor, we all have a dog in the hunt because at least here in Miami, people understand what Castro represented. They understand that during the missile crisis, he was trying to convince Khrushchev to nuke the United States. That's not just nuke the Cuban Americans in the United States. That's nuke the entire country.
And I'm assuming they wouldn't have been aiming at Raleigh from there, right? I mean, I think they would have been aiming at Hialeah in '62.
He would have been aiming anywhere he could have been aiming at, including Washington, New York, and Miami. But that's not the point. The point is, right-thinking people get it. He's not a good guy. Kaepernick was like giving him props and praising him. Again, talking about how great his healthcare system is, how great the education system is over there. I'm thinking, yeah, if it's so great, why is it that people are launching out into shark-infested open waters on rafts to get the hell away from there? It's so wonderful. They get taught the alphabet so great that they would risk their lives to leave. Please, it's
insulting. It really is. And
it is insulting.
He paid a price for it when he came out on the field. Almost won the game, by the way. And
he played great.
Then you have to write the story of Kiko Alonso making the tackle. There was some symmetry in the game last weekend in Miami, right?
Beautiful symmetry. And Kiko Alonso, his father was a Cuban immigrant. He is a Cuban American. And he had a great game. He had an interception. He had a fumble recovery. He led the team with 12 tackles. And he had the last hit on Colin Kaepernick, tackling him 2 yards short of the goal line to seal a Dolphins victory. And if you watch the tackle, Kaepernick's helmet comes flying off. He's bent over backwards. It was a mess, the way Colin Kaepernick was left on the field. Meanwhile, after the tackle, Kiko is celebrating on the 50-yard line. And I talked to Kiko afterward, and I asked him, did you have any extra motivation for this game? And he said, well, to be honest, I didn't read your column. And then I was like, what? But he said, but I was aware of it, and I knew where Kaepernick stood, and there was bad blood there for me. And so that was it. And I was talking to his father as well, and his father called Kaepernick clueless. Kiko called him ignorant. People who knew understood why it's not a good thing. And the most interesting part of all this is we call Kaepernick ignorant. I don't believe anymore that it's ignorance. Because after that game, and understand that game was held 6 days after that press conference, or 4 days after that press conference, he had time to study and to look at his position. And he clearly did. And after that game, in the shadows of what was still, in Little Havana in Miami, a mass celebration of the death of Fidel Castro, he comes out and says, look, I believe that Castro did great things with, again, the narrative, healthcare.
Dude, what website is he reading from?
Well, I mean, my point would be, I don't care that he instituted healthcare. My aunt died of cancer in Cuba, and she wasn't able to get any treatment. So, how great was the healthcare? The point is, these are talking points almost that he just repeats by rote, and it just loses the context of facts and history. So he continues to say, great health care. He was a friend to Nelson Mandela. He instituted a wonderful education system. And I'm thinking, this is no longer about ignorance. You've studied on this thing, and you've decided that you're going to like Fidel Castro. That's that.
Well, and he is gone. You are there. The Dolphins are coming here, and the Dolphins are playing some pretty good football. And I've talked a lot about that this week. You've chronicled this for 30 years. You've seen a lot of really bad football there. I've come down and seen a lot of really bad football there. There feels to be a little bit of energy around the franchise, and certainly around that game last week and around the Castro thing. And I've never heard that stadium louder, and I know they've remodeled the stadium. The Dolphins are trying to sort of swim out of this awfulness of this century, quite frankly, right?
It's been really 16 bad years for the Miami Dolphins. I mean, I'm not talking about miss the playoffs bad. I'm talking about clownish things happening to them. I'm talking about Nick Saban taking a job in Miami and, 30 minutes later deciding he didn't really want to, but now feeling committed and lasting only 2 years. And in that 2 years saying, I will never be the Alabama coach, and 2 weeks later, he's the Alabama coach. I'm talking about Jimmy Johnson quitting 1 year, then being convinced to come back the next day and coaching another year, and then going out with a 62-7 loss to Jacksonville. And getting to name his successor, Dave Wanstead, who drove the franchise into the ground. I'm talking about Cam Cameron going 1-15. Things like that have
We don't
happened.
mention the one around here. As Brian Billick said, it's probably what made him my business partner here. So, yeah, we do remember that. Yes.
Exactly.
I don't talk to Matt Stover about that much either, by the way, either. So.
Exactly. And so those type of things, it's been really bad. But I think that they found a guy in Adam Gase who gets it, who's had success, who's young, who's smart, who has swag. The guy yesterday, Nestor, he cut a guy on the field. Cut him on the field. Leon Orr, on his day off, went, to the other coast, to the west coast of Florida, and was stopped and arrested for having drug paraphernalia and marijuana and PCP in his car. He bonded out, came back to South Florida, was at practice yesterday when the Dolphins found out about it. As soon as the Dolphins found out about it, at practice, Adam Gase said, "You're off the team. Goodbye. See ya. Pack your stuff."
Well, that sets a tone now, doesn't it?
Yeah. So that's the point with Adam, and that's not the first time that he has summarily cut people like that after either A, bad performance, B, a moment where they embarrass the club. So that's one of the things that has changed. He's changed the culture down here in South Florida.
He is Armando Salguero. He is a Hall of Fame voter and Hall of Fame dude covering the Dolphins for many, many years, as well as the rest of the sports world as a columnist now at the Miami Herald. You can follow his journey at Armando Salguero. Any thoughts that they're really good or that they're going to lose? I mean, if they lose this week, it goes back to sort of same old Dolphins, and they're going to claw along and try to get to 9 or 10 and be one of the wild card teams. But any thoughts that they really are good and they're going to win 4 of the next 5 and go on some sort of a roll here? I mean, are you really bought in on Tannehill?
I'm not really bought in on Tannehill. I think Tannehill has moments of that thing below brilliance, whatever that is, of very goodness. Last week was one of those. I think that he's lately and during this 6-game stretch, he's thrown 1 interception. So, yeah, he's great when he's not making a mistake. But they understand that they're not a great team. They know that they have to have all their I's dotted and T's crossed every week for them to have a good chance of winning on Sunday. And sometimes it comes down to the last play. Last week it did. The week before that, they had to score 2 touchdowns in the final 4 minutes to squeak out a victory at Los Angeles. The week before that, Kiko Alonso had a pick 6 in the final 2 minutes to win the game at San Diego. And the week before that, they had a kickoff return touchdown to beat the Jets in the final minute and a half. So what I would say to you is this game is probably going to come down to the fourth quarter, if not the final couple of minutes. And we'll see what happens.
We have a hell of a kicker, though. I'll tell you that. When it comes down to the last couple of minutes and it's a 3-point game, we feel pretty good about it around here.
No doubt about it. But, it's not always in the kicker's foots.
well, 2 weeks from now, they go to New York. They go to Buffalo.
Yeah.
You've been around a long time, and Lawrence Taylor used to tell me all the time, those Miami and Tampa and Jacksonville teams, they're all too skinny. They're all lean. They're all meant to run, and then all of a sudden they got to go to Buffalo and play in December or go to MetLife Stadium when the wind's blowing the week before Christmas. The one thing the Dolphins have never had really is that kind of a running game, and with Tunzel and with the offensive line and with what they've tried to do there, they're trying to run the ball. And if they get everybody healthy with Ajayi, it looks to me like they could be that team. But much like the Ravens, they've had a really banged-up O-line for a period of time here.
Again, the Dolphins are a flawed team. They're offensive line is banged up. I think they have a good probability of getting both Brandon Albert at left tackle and Laramie Tunsil at left guard back for the Ravens. They're still going to be without Mike Pouncey. They might be without Devontae Parker, who's averaged 20 yards a catch in 3 of the last 4 games. So those things, they all have repercussions for this team. But I will say, when they get their running game going, it limits the errors that they make on offense because all of a sudden the ball is not in Tannehill's hands 40 times. It limits the snaps that they have to take on defense because the defense is not on the field and they're holding the ball, they're controlling the time of possession. And it obviously wears down the opposition because, Jay Ajayi, if you're a believer in Pro Football Focus, he's the NFL's leader in, yards after contact. He breaks tackles, he runs away from tackles, but he is a downhill runner. And downhill runners in the fourth quarter, after he's been pounding on you time and time again, all of a sudden the secondary, the defensive backs, they're not as good at tacklers.
Well, and even when it's 20 degrees out, they don't like it very much, which is a real benefit to the Dolphins. Armando, it's been a great visit with you, man. You did some great work last week, and I always enjoy your work and enjoy following you. Hope to catch up with you. Stop by Super Bowl Radio Row and visit with us as well, and hope to see you up here this weekend if you're making the trip, man.
Happy to do it, Nestor.
The only guy who has suffered more than Cameron Wake is you, I think, at this point, right?
I got a great life, brother. I'm in America.
Take care of yourself. Armando Salguero of the Miami Herald, a great follow. And by all means, if you go read his work on Castro and on Kaepernick from last week, I think you'll find it very, very compelling. You can find me out in the Bahia Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. I hope you find that compelling as well. It's there. Download, podcast, listen when you want, where you want, how you want. And when you want. I don't think they let you listen in Cuba, but you can listen anywhere in South Florida and into the Keys. We got football all weekend long. Luke and I are on the scene. If there's any breaking news at all, you'll get it first on the WNST Tech Service. That is brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Like Peter Angelos, I am a very available individual. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook Live, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.